Hello everybody, I am Cassidy, I'm the Hippie Catholic. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe to be a part of the conversation. Okay, so this is the part 2 of the video series that I'm doing on my channel. The first video was about if Billie Eilish sold her soul to the devil for fame. So if you want to watch that, that will be in the card above and the description below. Basically what I brought up in that video was that the act of selling one's soul is something that is celebrated in certain non-Christian religions, and we're going to be exploring one of those today, and that is Voodoo. Now, I understand that Voodoo is a very, very diverse religion. Like, there's no way that one video is going to be able to wrap up the entirety of Voodoo. And I also know that like Voodoo doesn't in itself have anything really to do with Halloween, but it does have to do with spirits, and the Catholic definition of Halloween is All Souls Day, so it's relevant to my Halloween series. So what is Voodoo? Voodoo is a religion practiced mostly in Haiti, and it takes influences from African witchcraft as well as Catholic iconography. And in terms of religion, Voodoo is actually a pretty new religion. It's not very old. And while it claims to have Catholic roots, those roots are very, very thin and have more to do with imperialism than theology, so keep that in mind. Disclaimer, I'm going to be discussing various religious traditions on this channel, and I'm going to be examining them from a Catholic lens to encourage education and religious literacy. This does not mean that I align with all the religions that I discuss. Many of them I fundamentally disagree with, like this one that I'm going to be discussing today. I'm Catholic, hence the Hippie Catholic. But I think it's important to have an understanding of other religious traditions so that as we navigate the realm of spirituality and just our own societies, we can kind of have an understanding of how other people are thinking and know what to agree and what to disagree with, rather than simply disagreeing or agreeing with principles because our parents told us to. One of the reasons I made this platform was to encourage active opinions and worldviews. And even though I was raised Catholic, I explored evangelical denominations and congregations, and ultimately I returned to the Catholic Church and actively aligned with my Catholic faith. I just think that it's really, really important for people to understand why they're aligning with a certain worldview. I'm not encouraging hate towards anybody who practices these religious practices. I believe that every human being, no matter what, deserves respect and love, and I believe that there's certain rights that every human being is entitled to that can never be taken away. Yeah, let's get into this. This relates to the Billie Eilish video because while Billie Eilish likely hasn't sold her soul to the devil, it is a possibility because selling one's soul or offering it up for possession, like I said earlier, is an actual religious practice that happens in a variety of non-Christian religions. I think that people minimize the possibility of the religious practice of selling one's soul because we've been so Christianized in our thought process, which I don't have a problem with that. I'm a Hippie Catholic. I love Christian thought processes, but this is an effect of that. We see people that even once they leave the Christian tradition, they think that it's impossible for other religions to have that as a ritualistic goal. One of the reasons why I'm examining Voodoo on this channel is because many claim that Voodoo is Catholic or somehow is compatible with Catholicism because of the imagery that it uses. And it's like I've come across Voodoo practitioners who have very much acted like that Voodoo was compatible with Catholic theology, and it's not. The similarities stop at graphic design. And it bothers me because many of these individuals were actively trying to deceive me into developing concepts about their religion that were not true. But then when I learned from their perspective of faith, this wouldn't seem like a problem for them because Voodoo ultimately is a religion of strategy. Whether they're being truthful or not isn't really the concern. In many ways, Voodoo is the polar opposite of evangelization. It's not concerned with if the spirits or deities that they're worshiping actually exist as conscious beings, but rather they're concerned with what they gain from the belief in these spirits. They're not really concerned with if the being they're praying to actually exists. They're more concerned with if the practice of worshiping that being gets them the results that they want, if that makes sense. Meanwhile, evangelizing focuses on spreading the truth of whatever religion they're preaching. Voodoo focuses on spreading what's practical, but not necessarily what's true. For example, let's say a voodoo practitioner is praying for healing or deliverance, right? They don't really care where the healing or protection is coming from as long as they're getting what they are asking for. It's sort of like an online order exchange. Like, they don't really see the process. They just know that the package shows up to their door. And it's strange when you consider that this voodoo ideology is similar to the ones that oppressed the creators of voodoo in the first place. Consumerism being a major oppressor that continues to exploit people of color and women today in post-colonial society. The oppression of people of color and women sparked the creation of voodoo in the first place and the promotion of being possessed by another entity to gain resources. For example, factory workers in Malaysia claim to be possessed by evil spirits because they were forced to work in a secular workplace in conditions run by rampant consumerism. These women were not given proper working conditions, they were not given proper pay. Because of the women's perverse behavior, the factory actually shut down. And while the Malaysian women weren't practicing voodoo, the mentality is the same. Possession, or the belief in possession or selling one's soul to another entity, allowed these women to make a political statement and ultimately yield the results that they wanted. Many of the institutions that oppress those who practice voodoo celebrate similar fundamental values. It doesn't matter what something costs as long as you gain what you want. The only difference is that the colonial and consumer-driven institutions considered traditional practitioners of voodoo and their ancestors to be the cost. When you look at voodoo's true roots, it's the child of oppression. Voodoo was intended to make oppressed lives more livable. It's ultimately a religion of survival strategy, shaped by a unique set of oppressive political and social circumstances. That's why I think it's appealing in many cases to people of color and women, because both of these groups have been systematically oppressed. Voodoo's creation was a response to oppression, a coping mechanism based on practicality dressed as spirituality. I think that this all relates to the argument that I made in the Billie Eilish video, because in traditions that celebrate selling one's soul, the logic of authenticity isn't really in their vocabulary. Those who practice rituals that involve selling one's soul aren't really concerned with if there's a conscious being or entity truly working behind the scenes to get them the results that they want, whether that be fame or fortune or what have you. They're just concerned with if they get what they want. You can look at both the Billie Eilish conspiracy theory and the practice of voodoo in either a secular or a spiritual way. And I think that's something that's really interesting. But ultimately, I feel that the natural and the supernatural are intrinsically connected. Because as Father Richard Rohr says, he's the author of The Universal Christ, he says, there's no distinction between the natural and the supernatural except in the mind. So keep that in mind. Please note that I do not support the deprivation theory while examining all forms of religion. The deprivation theory assumes that people, especially women, behave religiously because of social and psychological reasons rather than religious reasons. I make the connection between voodoo and oppression because of the set of ideology associated with its teachings as well as its historical context. It literally is a religion created in response to oppressive practices. Voodoo's creation comes from a unique set of historical circumstances that cannot be applied to the creation of all religions across the board, as the deprivation theory suggests. So that's why I kind of disagree with the deprivation theory. I don't think that all religions are based off of a system of oppression. It's also interesting to consider that both religious scholars and Catholic exorcists agree that the phenomena of possession statistically occurs more so in women than in men. And there's many problematic explanations for why that is, but I feel like that can be for another video. But once again, this all relates to the first Billie Eilish video because Billie is a young woman. Women, especially young women, are associated with the phenomena of possession. We see this spanning all the way back to the Greek tragedy, the Bacchae, where Dionysus, the Greek god of wine and madness, possesses Agave, queen of Thebes, and causes her to kill her own son. Even when you watch movies like The Possession of Emily Rose or even just The Exorcist, you probably think of the possessed person as being a female, even though the account that The Exorcist was based off of was involving a boy, not a girl. I'm not surprised that people created this conspiracy theory suggesting that Billie Eilish could sell her soul, because the whole idea of selling one's soul and the whole notion of possession in general are associated with femininity. I also wouldn't be surprised if Billie in some way was knowledgeable about this association between possession and women. And I believe that she's using the subconscious societal connection between the dark side of the supernatural and womanhood to explore negative emotions that are often repressed and never processed. And I'm also not surprised that people have made these speculations about her because of the statistic that there's more women that are afflicted by possession than men. It's really interesting when you dive into religious practices that celebrate possession and celebrate selling one's soul for fame and fortune or whatever you want to get. I think it's just really, really interesting when you examine those things from a Catholic lens, because we do not endorse any of that. While the mentality behind voodoo was a response to oppression, it doesn't solve oppression. It doesn't break the cycle. The Catholic faith is not compatible with the practices of voodoo. But anyway, so that's my commentary on one religious practice that celebrates selling one's soul. I hope that this gave you guys some insight on another religious practice. I know this is kind of a little bit different than what I usually do, but yeah. I was approved to have a Patreon account, so if you're financially able, please consider supporting me there. And thank you to my lovely patrons for helping support this channel. This really, really means a lot to me. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. I'm Cassidy. I'm the Hippie Catholic. God bless and be spooky.